They say the West was a place where dreams went to either die or come alive. For a young woman named Clara, it was the only place that promised the life she had been aching for. She had spent all her 19 years in the same dusty town, a place where the streets were quiet, the gossip loud, and opportunity as scarce as rain in July. Her family, kind, loving, yet worn down by endless misfortune, could barely make ends meet. Every day Clara watched her father's hands, rough and calloused, tremble from toil and exhaustion. Every night she saw her mother's eyes, heavy with worry, silently pleading for a miracle. And in those moments, Clara understood one undeniable truth. If she stayed, she would never escape the slow erosion of hope. But Clara's heart was restless. She dreamed of horizons that stretched farther than the wooden fences of her town. She dreamed of open skies, of wind rushing past on horseback, of a life where she could be more than a daughter, a worker, or a shadow of someone else's expectations. Then one crisp morning, a small piece of paper changed everything. A yellowed advertisement, tucked inside the newspaper she barely paid attention to, caught her eye. Gentlemen seeking wives. Suitable young women may inquire. Adventure, security, and a new life await in the West. Clara stared at the words, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. Could it really be so simple? Could a single choice carry her across mountains, rivers, and endless prairies into a world she had only dared imagine in whispers and sketches? The thought terrified her. And yet, the thought thrilled her. She walked the streets of her town one last time, each corner familiar, each shadow holding memories. The bakery where she once stole sugar with reckless delight. The church steeple where her mother prayed for better days. The riverbank where she had kissed the wind and promised herself she would not be confined. Everything she loved, and everything she feared, was here, yet she could not remain. The decision crystallized like frost on a winter morning. She would leave. She would risk the unknown, step into the wide open world, and dare to believe that life could be more than hardship and small-town sorrow. She would become a mail-order bride, not because she longed for marriage alone, but because it was the bridge between the life she had and the life she wanted. And so, with a trembling hand, she sent her reply. A letter that carried all her hope, all her fear, and every secret dream she had ever dared whisper to herself. She sealed it with a quiet prayer that it would reach the right man in the right place at the right time, or at least, that it would carry her far enough from home to discover who she could truly be. As she watched the sun climb over the rooftops one last time, Clara felt a strange mix of sorrow and anticipation. Behind her lay everything she had ever known. Ahead lay everything she could ever imagine, and perhaps, everything she could not. Because in the West, every choice was a gamble, and every dream came with a price. But Clara was ready to pay it. The road west was nothing like Clara had imagined. She had pictured a journey full of hope, of gentle landscapes rolling past her window, of quiet towns where friendly faces greeted her arrival. But the West had no patience for dreams. It demanded grit, endurance, and a stubborn heart. The first days were long and unrelenting. Her wagon creaked under the weight of her belongings, every mile a test of resolve. Dust clawed at her lungs, and the sun beat down like a relentless overseer. Nights were no relief. Cold crept in from all sides, the wind whispering secrets she didn't want to hear. Alone beneath the vast, unbroken sky, she felt the first sharp bite of the frontier's loneliness. And then the dangers began to show themselves, subtle at first, like shadows in the distance. A sudden rustle in the brush. A low growl that set her blood running cold. Bandits, they said, roamed these roads, preying on those too naive, or too desperate, to see them coming. Clara clutched her small knife, a poor defense against the harsh truths of a world that did not care for innocence. One evening, a pair of eyes gleamed from the darkness. Horses pawed the ground, and voices whispered threats carried by the wind. Clara's heart pounded, every instinct screaming to run, yet her feet rooted in place. Survival was no longer an abstract concept. It was a pulse racing in her veins, a choice she had to make at every turn. The wildlife, too, reminded her that nature was no friend to the unwary. She learned to listen for the snap of a branch, to watch the gleam of eyes in the shadows, to respect the predators that moved silently across the plains. Wolves, coyotes, even the sudden flare of a hawk overhead, all seemed to mark her progress, to remind her that every step forward came at a cost. Water ran scarce, food scarcer, and every day brought new trials. Swollen rivers that threatened to sweep her wagon away, jagged cliffs that loomed impossibly close, and storms that churned the sky into black chaos. The West tested her in ways she had never known a human could be tested. Each mile demanded strength, courage, and a sharp mind. Yet, in the heart of that relentless journey, Clara began to understand something vital. She was capable of more than she had imagined. The fear that had once paralyzed her became a teacher, shaping her into someone who could anticipate danger, read the land, and endure what others might call impossible. The frontier was cruel, yes, but it was also honest. There were no illusions, no empty comforts. What survived here was real, and Clara was beginning to see herself as real too. But the road held more than just hardship. It held whispers of what lay ahead: towns, strangers, promises, and betrayals. Every bend in the trail hinted at a story waiting to unfold, a test waiting to be faced, a life waiting to be claimed. And Clara, weary yet unbroken, pressed on, knowing that the true measure of her journey was not the miles behind her, but the one still stretching endlessly before her. Because in the West, survival was not merely about reaching your destination. It was about becoming someone who could endure the journey, who could rise after every fall, who could face the unknown with eyes wide open and heart unyielding. And Clara was learning what it truly meant to walk that line between fear and courage. Clara had imagined the moment 1,000 times. The moment she would step off the wagon, heart racing with hope, and see a life waiting for her. A husband who would greet her with warmth, a home that would shelter her from the storms of the world, and a future painted in the golden hues of possibility. But the West does not reward dreaming. The town she arrived in was smaller than she had pictured, its streets cracked and dusty, its buildings leaning like weary travelers. And the man who had sent letters full of promises? He was not the man she had imagined. His smile was quick, practiced, but it never reached his eyes. His hands, though strong, moved with a tension that spoke of secrets, of things better left unsaid. Clara's heart sank as she took in the reality of her situation. Every word he had written, every vow of affection, had been carefully crafted to lure her into this place. A mail-order bride, they had called her, an opportunity, a fresh start, but she felt more like a pawn in a game she had never agreed to play. She tried to mask her fear with politeness, with a fragile veneer of composure. Yet, beneath it, a storm of doubt and anger brewed. Who was this man? Why had he sent for her under false pretenses? And why, of all places, did she feel the invisible walls closing in as soon as she crossed the threshold of what was supposed to be her new home? It wasn't just him. The town itself whispered betrayal. Neighbors who smiled too brightly, shopkeepers who lingered with too many questions, the subtle glances of men who measured her like a piece of property. Every interaction carried a weight she had not anticipated, a reminder that survival here would require more than courage. It would require cunning, resilience, and an unwavering sense of self. The first night alone in the house, Clara felt the full chill of isolation. The walls, though they sheltered her body, offered no comfort to her spirit. She thought of her family, of the life she had left behind, and the bitter taste of disappointment settled in her mouth. Was this the price of seeking freedom? A life built on lies? And yet, amid the despair, something stirred within her, a quiet, stubborn refusal to surrender. She would not be broken by deceit. She would not allow her hopes to be extinguished by someone else's cruelty. The West might be harsh, unyielding, and full of betrayal, but it had not yet claimed her spirit. She began to notice the details that told the truth the man could not hide. The locked door to the back room, the ledger with strange entries, the quick, guarded responses when she asked about the town or his past. Each discovery sharpened her instincts, honed her perception, and ignited a spark of determination. By the time the second day drew to a close, Clara understood something vital. Love, at least the kind she had imagined, would not arrive on her doorstep. What awaited her was survival, strategy, and the courage to face a world that had already tried to deceive her. And in that realization, something powerful took root, a knowledge that she could endure, adapt, and perhaps even turn the very betrayal that had ensnared her into a weapon for her own freedom. The West had shown her its teeth and she had felt the bite. But Clara was learning to fight back. Clara quickly realized that surviving the West required more than hope. It demanded action, quick thinking, and a willingness to step into the unknown with nothing but courage and wits as companions. The betrayal she had faced was not the end of her story, it was the beginning of a new kind of education, one that the harsh frontier alone could teach. At first, each step she took was careful, measured. She learned to read the town's rhythms, which streets were safest at which hours, which neighbors could be trusted, and which ones carried secrets in their eyes. Every interaction became a lesson in vigilance, every glance a potential warning. The West had a language of its own, and Clara was determined to learn it. Her first small victories were like sparks in a long, dark night. She bartered for supplies with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed, earning the respect of a grizzled shopkeeper who had once dismissed her as naive. She deciphered the intentions of the town's more dangerous men, avoiding confrontation by knowing when to fight and when to disappear. Every decision, every move, honed her instincts, sharpened her resolve. Yet survival was never without setbacks. A sudden confrontation in the saloon left her bruised and wary. A misunderstanding with a local rancher nearly cost her freedom, and the man she had come to distrust still loomed over her, a reminder that danger could appear even in the place she had been promised safety. Each failure, however, taught her something new: patience, strategy, and the necessity of keeping her mind as sharp as her courage. Through it all, Clara began to find unexpected allies. A widowed farmer who respected her intelligence, a young ranch hand with a quiet sense of honor, even a stray dog who seemed to sense her need for companionship. Together, these connections became a network of strength, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, humanity could still offer refuge. By the end of her first season in the town, Clara had changed. She moved with purpose now, her presence measured but undeniable. Where once fear had guided her steps, she now relied on foresight and intuition. She knew how to navigate the town's undercurrents, how to speak without revealing too much, and when to stand her ground. Courage had become her armor, and her mind a weapon more precise than any gun. But the West continued to test her. Every victory carried the seed of new danger, every moment of security a reminder that the frontier did not forgive weakness. Clara felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders, but she welcomed it. For the first time she understood that survival was not merely enduring, it was mastering the rules of a world that sought to break her, and in doing so discovering who she truly was. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara's reflection in the window was no longer the same timid girl who had left home. Her eyes held steel now, her posture unyielding, her mind alive with possibilities. She had tasted the bitter lessons of betrayal and hardship, but she had also learned the sweet satisfaction of self-reliance, of carving her own path where none had existed before. And though the West remained as unpredictable as ever, Clara no longer feared it. She had begun to understand it, to respect it, and to meet it on her own terms. The journey of survival had transformed her, and the woman who had once arrived trembling at the threshold of a stranger's house was now someone the frontier itself would have to reckon with. Because courage, Clara realized, was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to rise again and again no matter how sharp the bite of the world might be. Clara had learned to survive, to endure, to navigate the harsh truths of the West. But survival alone could not fill the hollowness that lingered in her heart. She had come seeking freedom, and though she had begun to taste it, she realized freedom was not merely escaping danger. It was choosing who she would trust, who she would let close, and what kind of life she would claim for herself. It began with a quiet presence. A man who lived on the edge of town, a farmer whose hands bore the same hard work as her father's, but whose eyes carried an honesty Clara had not seen since leaving home. He did not speak in promises or flourish gestures. He simply acted with integrity. He offered help without expectation, respect without condescension, and in his company, Clara felt a fragile hope stirring, a hope that trust could exist in this rugged, unforgiving land. Their bond grew slowly, measured by shared tasks, small acts of kindness, and moments where silence said more than words ever could. In his presence she found not just affection, but the courage to envision a life where love did not come with chains or deceit. It was a revelation that love, like freedom, must be chosen, and must be defended. But the past would not release its hold so easily. The man who had lured her west, the one who had spun lies and threatened to control her life, still cast a shadow over her days. He underestimated her, thinking a woman alone could be cornered, manipulated, and subdued. Clara knew better. She had endured too much, learned too much, and the fire within her would not be snuffed out by intimidation. Confrontation came like a storm. Words were exchanged, truths laid bare, and threats revealed. But Clara no longer trembled. She spoke with a clarity born of experience, with a strength forged by the journey, and with a resolve that left no room for doubt. She would not be claimed, caged, or dictated to. Her life was hers to shape, and she would defend it with every ounce of herself. The moment of choice arrived as the sun dipped low over the horizon. Clara could remain trapped in a life that had been offered to her, shackled by lies and fear, or she could step into the open, take the reins of her destiny, and embrace the love she had earned. Her decision was neither easy nor without risk, but it was hers, and hers alone. With a steady hand and a steady heart, she rode into the wide-open prairie, the wind carrying away the chains of the past. Beside her, the man who had earned her trust and respect rode in silence, not as a captor, not as a rescuer, but as an equal. Together they rode toward a future built not on promises or advertisements, but on choice, courage, and the shared understanding that love in the West was something to be fought for, and fiercely protected. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a liberation that went beyond physical escape. She had confronted danger, outwitted deception, and claimed her autonomy. But more than that, she had chosen a life where her heart could belong to someone worthy, where her spirit could soar unbound, and where the horizon was no longer a boundary, but an invitation. And as the sun sank beneath the endless plains, Clara understood the truth she had been seeking all along. Freedom was not given. It was seized. Love was not found by chance. It was earned. And in that moment, with the wind in her hair and the future stretching endlessly before her, she knew she had finally arrived, not just in a place, but in the woman she had fought to become. Clara sat quietly as the sun dipped low over the endless horizon, the prairie stretching far beyond what her eyes could see. The journey that had begun with hope and naivety had transformed her in ways she could never have imagined. She had left home with dreams of love and opportunity, and the West had tested her every step of the way. She had lost some things along the trail, innocence, certainty, the comfort of a familiar life, but she had gained far more. She had learned the language of survival, the rhythm of the land, and the strength that comes from trusting herself. She had discovered that courage was not a single moment of bravery, but a lifetime of choices, of rising after every fall, and of standing firm even when the world seemed bent on breaking her. Love, too, had come on its own terms. Not the promises of letters written in another's hand, but something real, something earned. She had discovered that true companionship required patience, respect, and the willingness to meet another human being as an equal, not a savior. The West had a way of showing what was genuine and what was hollow, and Clara had learned to see the difference. Yet even as she rode into a future of her own choosing, there was a quiet ache, a bittersweet understanding that the frontier was never easy. It demanded sacrifice, resilience, and an unflinching eye for reality. The West was beautiful, yes, wild and full of possibility, but it was also relentless, indifferent, and often unforgiving. Clara knew that life ahead would not be without its trials. The wind would still bite, the nights would still grow cold, and dangers would never fully vanish. But she also knew this. She was no longer the girl who had arrived trembling at a stranger's doorstep. She was a woman forged by the journey, tempered by hardship, and guided by the choices she had made with clarity and courage. As she looked out across the plains, her hand resting on the reins, she felt a profound sense of possibility. The horizon was not a limit, it was an invitation. An open road where every mile was hers to claim, every decision hers to make, and every sunrise a promise of a life lived boldly, fiercely, and freely. And so Clara rode on, carrying both the weight of her past and the hope of her future. She had learned the truth of the West, that it would not give anything freely, but for those willing to fight, to endure, and to choose their own path, it offered a life rich with both challenge and reward. The journey had been long. The road had been perilous. But she had arrived, not just in a place but in herself. And in that knowledge she finally felt the quiet triumph of a heart unbound, a spirit unbroken, and a life truly her own.